This video was originally set to be published a couple of days ago. Since then, I got distracted by a number of interviews with Venezuelan journalists and also a bunch of meetings. And there was a drone incident and a firefight in the capital between Chavista factions, but it didn't change anything, so the analysis that you're about to see still stands. Words matter. Around 2 a.m. on Sunday, January 3rd, 2026, U.S. Army Special Operations Forces busted into Venezuela, bombed the hell out of a short list of targets, and arrested Niucolas Maduro, the usurper of the Venezuelan presidency. Venezuelans around the world are over the moon. The American left, and a lot of well-meaning but generally less informed independents are crying about it. Now that 2 days have passed, more information has come out, and I spent those 2 days talking and texting with about 30 different people inside Venezuela and in the exile community on 3 continents. Now I can make a better analysis of what happened and what crossroads Venezuela is at. I need to make a few things clear. This is the information I specifically need you to walk away with after you watch this. The United States did not do a regime change in Venezuela. The United States invaded Venezuelan territory, did airstrikes that killed approximately 40 soldiers, and arrested Maduro and took him back to the US, where he will stand trial for a medieval scroll of criminal charges. It was not a regime change. It was an invasion because the legitimate National Assembly did not activate Article 180 Section 11 of the Constitution, which authorizes a foreign government to come swooping in to save Venezuela's ass. Also, Venezuela has not had a legitimate National Assembly in years. Maduro blatantly violated his own country's constitution when he made the version of the National Assembly that exists today. He didn't only usurp power, he changed the government and created new jobs and new parliamentary maps and more legislative districts than before, and he changed the names of places and even the name of a whole state, all of this out of sync with their own constitution. Then the bozos in the legitimate National Assembly literally canceled Juan Guaido's interim government and became the political coalition called the Unitary Platform so that they could try to have another presidential election with the regime under the regime's rules. So there really is no National Assembly. Under better circumstances, it would have been a Venezuelan decision done under their constitution, but that was never going to happen because Maduro dragged both his regime and the legitimate opposition government into an unprecedented, complete extra-constitutional wilderness years ago. So, yeah, it was an invasion. We'll come back to this. Even though multiple anti-aircraft gunners got vaporized in different parts of the capital, most of the fatalities were Cuban special forces. Yes, Cuban Special Forces. The Venezuelan Presidential Guard, which is kind of like our Secret Service, but it's really a Venezuelan military unit, has been a bunch of active-duty Cuban soldiers dressed in Venezuelan uniforms and civilian suits, depending on their duty assignment. Those guys got eliminated by the Delta Force operators that hit the ground in Miraflores. And then they grabbed Maduro, put him in a helicopter, then put him on the USS Iwo Jima, where they sailed back to US waters. Then they put him on another helicopter to New York. He's probably not coming back. Unless some future president is crazy and dumb enough to pardon this man, he and his wife are probably going to prison for the rest of their lives. And this was not a regime change. I'm dying on this hill. Words are important. The US grabbed Maduro. They left everyone else right where they are. The vice president, Delcy Rodriguez, is now the acting president. The Armed Forces High Command, all Chavistas and most of them literally running organized crime rackets, are still in their posts. All the way down to the local level, the same cops and soldiers shaking people down for cash and consumer goods at vehicle checkpoints are all still there. At this moment, thousands of Cuban soldiers literally keeping the regime in place are still there. Minus 40. Only Maduro and the First Lady are the ones that the US made examples of. I understand where many of you might be coming from with the international law arguments, but I'm sorry, your arguments simply do not apply here. Venezuela is not a sovereign country. It is a Cuban colony with some Russians and Hezbollah guys, and, God is my witness, FARC dissidents and the ELN from Colombia, both of whom have entire fiefdoms in the Venezuelan borderlands that include cities and towns. Cuba sends doctors and equal numbers of soldiers to Venezuela, and in return, they get oil and lithium at below market prices. And the same executive cabinet that usurped 2 unlawful additional terms in power is still there. The king is dead, long live the queen. Venezuela is not a sovereign country. It is a drug cartel LARPing as a government, waging a years-long war against unarmed civilians who voted against that same regime in order to serve a colonial function for Red Cuba. Red Cuba, believe it or not, has done more interventions to try to overthrow Latin American governments in 60 years than the US has done in 200 years. The only theoretical sovereignty left in that country is with the people directly, and the overwhelming majority of them are happy about this and have prayed to see that man in handcuffs. Your arguments about international law do not apply to Venezuela in its current situation. It is not a sovereign country. It is a country kidnapped by a gang and an occupation army. I will admit, I'm nervous about the Trump administration being the ones doing this because they've been so hostile to the Constitution and to institutional norms here at home. Yes, Donald Trump lost the 2020 presidential election and tried for a time to stay in power illegally, and he continues to deny that he lost in 2020, and ICE is a new standing army wiping its ass every day with the Bill of Rights, and especially cruel to Venezuelan immigrants. And this invasion of Venezuela and arrest of Maduro is something the overwhelming majority of Venezuelans are overjoyed about and desperately wanted. They have agency, remember? All of these things can be true at the same time. Since the arrest, President Trump has said there will be other military operations in Venezuela. Marco Rubio has said there will not be more military operations in Venezuela. Hegseth seems to not be able to articulate an actual plan of transition in interviews, and that concerns me because why take out Hitler just to leave Göring and Himmler and not have a real plan? For a minute, I was taken aback that the State Department was willing to make Maduro's cabinet, Rodriguez and her cabinet, into U.S. puppets rather than install the actual president-elect, Edmundo Gonzalez. But then again, if the Trump cabinet knows about the Cuban troops in Venezuela, they probably also know that the Venezuelan opposition is not serious about governing. I was surprised for a minute when Trump said Nobel Prize winner Maria Corina Machado doesn't have the support to be able to govern. Maybe Maduro's armed forces don't support her, but the average Joe Venezuelan genuinely is a fan. She won the opposition's presidential primary with a landslide 93%, and she was front and center in the campaign of the guy who won the general election by a landslide. I'm not a fan. I think most of the opposition, including her, is fake, and I think she prioritizes her political career over the country actually being free. But she really does have the public support there to be able to govern, I do admit that. I think the likelihood is President Trump said that out of jealousy because she won the specific prize that he very publicly coveted. I think a lot of Americans are making a good faith argument with their concern that Venezuela could become Iraq 2.0. That would happen if the US committed ground troops and didn't deal directly with Cuba. Havana would absolutely guarantee that the paramilitary collectives and the parts of the armed forces and police and the Colombian guerrillas fight an insurgency against the Yankees. But even though the majority of the Venezuelan population generally supports a long-term US military situation, ground troops does not seem to be in the Trump administration's plans. They really seem to want to do this the easy way. Also, Venezuela is already at Iraq 2.0 and has been there for years. There have been around 30 pitched battles in that country in the last decade between the regime and dissident groups and gang militias that used to be loyal enforcers, and quite often between different organs of the military and the police when they fight each other over the drug routes. The Bolivarian Revolution has killed nearly 500,000 Venezuelans and forced 8 million to leave the country. In the same amount of time, the revolution in Venezuela has a higher death toll and diaspora size than the entire US war in Afghanistan. We are way past Iraq 2.0, and you knew nothing about it. And remember, without congressional approval, each one of those Navy ships in the Caribbean will have to leave after it's been there 90 days. The Navy has to go home eventually. This whole thing about the US will be running Venezuela will probably be Washington issuing instructions to the Rodriguez regime to hand over oil facilities to American oil companies and release political prisoners and respect the next election's results in that order. And if she doesn't, they all know the US can and will come for her and keep killing Cubans and arresting Venezuelan usurper presidents until they behave obediently as proper US puppets. Yes, the gringos just want Venezuela's oil, and the overwhelming majority of Venezuelan people are fully aware of this and okay with it because it's still a monumental improvement to the situation up to January 3rd. And honestly, the Venezuelan people deserve to have this shot. This is one situation where a band of American self-dealers and snake oil salesmen acted in a self-interested way that created a real opportunity for 30 million people inside and outside the country to stop suffering. I have heard too many Venezuelan mothers wailing over their dead children. I know civilians who are still in military prisons because they volunteered to knock doors to get out the vote for Edmundo Gonzalez. I know people who get regularly extorted by the local police, and they have to pay those cops money every month, or else they'll get arrested and locked up on bullshit charges of crimes against children. And they get phone calls every day where they are told their current location just to remind them daily that they're being watched and there is no escape. And the day Maduro was arrested was the first day those people got no phone calls. Yes, there is the possibility that this could end badly, but they still need and deserve this opportunity that they've been afforded to have real reforms that can bring the active reign of terror to an end. I don't care if those reforms come at the end of an American sword of Damocles while the Trump administration blatantly shakes down the Chavistas for American business interests. That's okay, because it's still a monumental improvement to what the people have been living for the last 20 years, especially the last 7 years. So please, get the hell out of the way. Thank you for watching Venezuela Explained.